I don't want to run out of voice. Now, is anybody afraid of the dark? Just put up your hand. Okay. I have 400 slides here. But I promise everyone that you'll be able to get a copy of the slides afterwards, and either in paper form or by email.
John, do you want me to click? You look like you
That's
don't have enough hands.
okay.
Okay.
John, how do I click? Why is it not?
Oh, that's okay.
No, I know it's not on the
It's not on the
screen.
screen. Oh.
Sorry. Where's this? Sorry, I'm not the technical person in the room.
Rick, do you know how to the data?
Oh, here it goes. Sorry, it's just warming up.
Yeah.
Oh, can I just also, can everybody make sure you turn your phone's ringer down?
And how many times do these things actually work? Anyways, we got it going. So the first thing I wanted to say that in Malcolm Gladwell's $1 Million Murray, who I hope that you have read, if you haven't, I certainly encourage you to do so. I was trying to make a comparison between $1 Million Murray and the person I call $0 Linda, because Murray was very much an exception, and although Linda is an exception in terms of as a person, she's not so much an exception in terms of persons receiving social assistance who are trying to get ahead. So this cartoon is just one of the many ways in which people misunderstand homelessness. But one of the reasons I wanted to put cartoons here is because if you Google cartoon and homeless, you'll get more cartoons than practically anything else. It's very interesting how there's very it's an object of humor for many cartoon writers.
John, so people on this side can't see the screen when you stand there.
Oh, okay. So if I stand back, can you see it now? Yeah. Okay. Better. So Murray was a homeless and severely alcoholic man whose story was told by Malcolm Gladwell. And if he'd had access to supportive housing and a supervised work environment, he could live out his life productively. And in fact, when he was actually forced into that environment, he tended to do better. And but instead, because of his medical corrections and other issues, it was when his workers and other people in the system told about how much he cost the system, they came up with over $1 million. So, but Linda is a Toronto woman with serious disabilities. She lives in subsidized housing and found part-time work, about 2.5 days a week, to supplement her disability income. But her public housing landlord immediately made the rent unaffordable, and her rent went from $109, which is the ODSP rental amount, up to over $600. It was a 470% increase in rent. And when you think about at the same time that you have your ODSP go down, because her ODSP was about $600 and it went down to $180, she didn't have enough money really to make a go of it with the work that she got. And so like Murray, she too could have done better had she received the help and advice that she needed, but at the same time the system in many ways was stacked against her. So Murray Bar represents a small fraction of that population, the homeless population, but in Linda's case, she really represents, in my view, the great majority of social assistance recipients who want to get ahead. So starting last year, just about a year ago in fact, when I think Carol Gore did the first article, was showcase the dilemma that Linda faced with the higher rent. And really what they do is they take the, it's different departments looking at the same dollar. And so instead of looking at the net dollar, they actually look at the gross dollar. And really that's the design flaw, if there's any design flaw in it, is that that's the key one. So Linda's story was written up 3 times, once by Carol Gore, twice by Catherine Porter, and then the 3rd time just recently by Catherine, and also Larry Montserrat wrote about her in mid-year, so it's a very compelling story. And as Catherine, who's here, described her situation, she paid $109 in rent every month, and that's the ODSP scale. And One of the things I love to say is rent guaranteed income is a great idea. They should try it sometime. They actually put people on those rental scales that in fact aren't really guaranteed income at all. And for most working age adults, so for people who are under 65, they actually aren't on RGI, and that's one of the problems. So her rent went up to 623, and her ODSP went down to 180, as we said. But the newspaper story didn't explain the bad policy that underlies Linda's dilemma, and really that's not, maybe we can argue that what a newspaper role is. And they didn't discuss the complex financial advice that Linda badly needed. So there's really 5 artifacts here. First of all is the fact that ODSP claws back from the first dollar, and it claws back 50 cents on the net dollar, which I think probably most people in this room understand. But the rent calculations for ODSP recipients of public housing are really out of line with reality, because that $109 that's charged has actually been in place for decades. If they were to raise that amount, of course, then it would be a transfer to the municipalities. So the province keeps those rents are artificially low. And then moving from ODSP shelter allowance to rent guaranteed income was a huge shock. And then if you go deep into the rules, you'll find there's this $440 rule. So that once your outside income goes above $440, you go to the rent guaranteed income scale, and that's when your rent soars. And finally, what we said, that both ministries look at the same dollar, and one takes 50 cents in clawback, and the other one raises rent by 30 cents. And of course, that's when you have an 80-cent clawback on each dollar. So I've tried to say that in some ways we're running governments like parking lots, and because parking lots have no-nonsense rules, and of course the social assistance and the rent guaranteed income system have no-nonsense rules, and they're also they're very complex also. So once again, it's really interesting that if you get cartoons and you do cartoons parking lots, you just find scads and scads and scads of cartoons. And I think people make fun of these situations because because there are so many rules. It's the same with bureaucrats and functionaries. I was a policy analyst in government, and I can tell you that they always show pictures of people that are disheveled and their tie is sort of hanging down. They got pen protectors with tails and that sort of thing. So it's interesting how we're seeing. So losing your ticket means you pay the full cost even if you parked for only 20 minutes, which I think we all know. And ODSP letters get sent to the wrong house may mean that you lose your benefits. So in other words, these are real no-nonsense systems. Parking lots say not responsible for damage however caused, which isn't true. But of course, social assistance says pay the overpayment however caused. And again, that's how I analogize it to the parking lot. Linda's case, the policy objective is to help her become self-reliant, keeping living rents low for people on disability. You know, on its own is a fair policy. And it's also fair to charge higher rents when someone on disability starts to realize more earnings. And it's certainly fair that a person on disability should receive less from the state as they start to make their own way of life. Each one of these rules taken singly is a fair rule, but when you put them all together, they become very unfair. So, as I've said, for these zero-tolerance type systems, it feels good to be tough and allow no nonsense and create rules that are crystal clear and unambiguous. But if the same rules apply to everyone, then the result should be greater fairness, right? Greater equity. But it's not hard to understand why we have voted in governments that create zero-tolerance policies with a lot less discretion in them. But, and here's another all-day parking for $1. Leave keys. It may be necessary to move your cart to a more convenient spot.
For who?
For who, right? So the problem is that the zero-tolerance rules remove the possibility of discretion, but unlike parking lot attendants, civil servants go to school and obtain advanced degrees, and we pay administrators, auditors, and whole departments large salaries to find better ways. So I want to say a little bit about the Auditor General. The Auditor General is an officer of Parliament, and we have about 4 or 5 officers of Parliament. And the reason we have officers of Parliament in the first place is to guard against and to balance out the excesses of government, because government is very powerful. So instead of reporting to government, they report to the Parliament directly. And that's what the Auditor General did. But when he gave his report this time, instead of balancing against the excess of government, he basically said, bring it on. Let's have more excess. And so rather than keeping his trust, in a way, with Parliament, he actually intervened and said the government should be even tougher on the people that it's there to serve. So he criticized the overpayments, and in other business systems, we all know that when social assistance calls, overpayments are called adjustments or debits. Heating and hydro bills are typically adjusted at the end of the year. When families use more heat or water than expected, they owe money to the utility company. We don't think of that as fraud. We just have an adjustment at the end of the year. And that's, I could get a shout out to government, because really on Monday the housing ministry has gone to a one-year reconciliation, and that's a huge difference, and I think it's a really important policy change that they've undertaken. And that new act that's replacing the Social Housing Reform Act is actually up on the Ontario Legislature website. And it's 93 pages. It's probably a bit of a cure for insomnia, but at the same time, everybody should download it and take a long look at it, because it's really been a long time coming. So, the Auditor General's preoccupation, though, with overpayments indicates that he accepts the distrustful manner in which OW and ODSP work. And really, as an officer of Parliament, I think he's really made a mistake in that. And from a fiscal point of view, overpayments are a good thing. They mean that more money is coming into the system. It's no money, it's coming in. So why are we so against money coming in to recipients? But we call it overpayments, and when we call it overpayments, it looks like something wrong has occurred when it hasn't. So more people have found part-time work, increased their hours, or succeeded in getting spousal support, and that reduces the cost of social assistance to government. The welcome page of the Auditor General's website says, and this is really important, it says serving the public interest. And I would say that in this particular instance, he simply did not serve the public interest. He served the government's interest. And when you're an officer of Parliament, that's not what you should be doing. You should be serving the public interest. Because he could have very easily looked at any way that a business or the Canada Revenue Agency looks at yearly reconciliation and simply gone to that and simply recommended that, but he didn't. It took the Ministry of Housing to figure it out for itself and actually make that change this week. So his basic role is to examine government's programs, but he failed to ask the most fundamental question that any auditor should ask, and that is, does the money we spend on Ontario Works and Ontario Disability Support help people to realize the overarching goals of these programs? Does it support them towards greater self-reliance, and do its rules treat recipients fairly when they strive for greater self-reliance? So, that's my part of it. I'm not going to give Linda's postscript, because that's something that Linda's going to do. So, at this point, we'll turn it over to Linda.